In the summer of 2022, something unexpected happened. A man who once commanded million-dollar logging machines in the swamps of North Carolina quietly turned on his phone camera and started a live stream. No production team. No script. Just him. If you watched the show Swamp Loggers years ago, you probably remember Bobby Goodson as the calm, experienced logger who could guide massive machines through mud and flooded forests like it was routine. For many viewers, the show felt honest, raw, even. It showed the danger, the physical labor, and the unpredictable environment. But here's the question most fans never asked. What happens after the cameras leave? Did life become easier once the TV spotlight disappeared? Or was the real struggle only beginning? Because when Bobby Goodson finally spoke to his fans in that live stream, he revealed something few people expected. The reality behind the show, and the years that followed, was far more complicated than anyone realized. And the truth was far heavier than a television story ever showed. The hidden reality behind reality television. During its run from 2010 to 2012, the television series Swamp Loggers gave viewers something rare, a genuine look at one of the toughest jobs in America. The show aired on Discovery Channel, and unlike many reality programs, it avoided exaggerated drama. Instead, it focused on real work, machines sinking into swamp water, crews racing against incoming storms, and the constant threat of equipment failure. Each episode followed Goodson's all-terrain logging, a family-run operation that specialized in extracting timber from wetlands where most logging crews wouldn't even attempt to work. Viewers saw giant skidders pulling logs through waterlogged soil. They saw harvesters cutting trees in places where the ground itself seemed unstable. They watched trucks loaded with timber struggle along narrow dirt roads surrounded by flooded forest. It was gripping television. But here's something most viewers never considered. When you watch a hard-working company on television, do you automatically assume it's financially successful? Many people do. The logic seems simple. If a company is on national television, surely the money must be good. Yet the truth behind small family businesses is often very different. For Bobby Goodson, the television exposure brought recognition, but it didn't eliminate the costs of operating one of the most demanding logging businesses in the country. And those costs were enormous. The machinery that never stops breaking. Swamp logging requires equipment that most people never see. These machines aren't standard tractors or trucks. They're heavily modified industrial machines designed to survive wetland environments where mud can swallow wheels and water constantly threatens mechanical systems. Tracked skidders alone can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Harvesters, massive machines capable of cutting, stripping, and processing trees, can cost even more. But buying the machines is only the beginning. Swamps are brutal environments for equipment. Mud clogs moving parts. Water corrodes metal. Heavy timber loads strain hydraulics and engines. Even the strongest machines eventually fail under those conditions. Repairs aren't occasional. They're constant. Sometimes a machine might break down once a month. Other times it might break down twice in a single week. And every time it happens, the crew must stop working while mechanics diagnose the problem. Replacement parts must be ordered. Skilled technicians must be paid. Each repair means lost production. Lost production means lost revenue. So here's another question worth asking. How does a business survive when the tools it depends on are constantly fighting against nature itself? For many swamp loggers, the answer is simple. They keep pushing forward. Expenses that never stop. Beyond machinery, the logging business carries a long list of ongoing costs. Fuel is one of the biggest. Every machine in the swamp runs on diesel. Every truck hauling timber to mills burns through gallons of fuel every hour. When fuel prices increase, even slightly, the cost of operating a logging crew skyrockets. Now add payroll. Logging is dangerous work, and experienced crew members deserve fair wages. Skilled operators capable of handling heavy machinery in swamp terrain are not easily replaced. Then there's insurance. Logging consistently ranks among the most dangerous professions in the United States. Because of that, insurance premiums are extremely high. And let's not forget transportation. Logs cut deep inside swampland must still be transported to lumber mills, sometimes dozens of miles away. Each mile costs money. When you combine these factors, the financial picture becomes far more complicated than television ever showed. The show documented the work. But it didn't reveal how thin the margins could be. When the cameras disappeared. In 2012, after 3 seasons, Swamp Loggers quietly ended. There was no dramatic finale. No farewell episode. The show simply stopped airing. For many reality television personalities, the end of a show becomes the beginning of something else. Public appearances, endorsements, or new entertainment opportunities. But Bobby Goodson didn't take that path. Instead, he returned to the swamps of eastern North Carolina and continued doing the same job he had always done. No celebrity tours. No reality TV reinvention. Just work. That choice says something important about his character. Because for Bobby, television had never been the destination. The logging business was. But while his dedication remained unchanged, the world around him was shifting. And those changes were about to test the industry in ways few people outside logging truly understood. A timber industry in transition. During the mid-2010s, the timber industry across the American South began changing. Large lumber companies started merging and expanding. Smaller mills closed or were absorbed into larger operations. To the average person, that might not sound significant. But for independent logging contractors, it changed everything. When large corporations dominate the industry, purchasing power shifts. Instead of dozens of small mills buying timber from local loggers, a handful of large companies begin controlling the supply chain. And when fewer buyers exist, prices become harder to negotiate. Which leads to an important question. What happens to small, specialized businesses when large corporations start controlling the market? Often, those businesses struggle to maintain stable contracts. Goodson's all-terrain logging had always been known for working in places others avoided, deep wetlands where heavy machinery risked sinking. For decades, that skill had been valuable. But as the industry moved toward efficiency and large-scale operations, niche expertise sometimes became less important than volume. Contracts became harder to secure. Payment schedules stretched longer. Margins shrank. Yet Bobby rarely spoke publicly about these challenges. On social media, he occasionally posted photos from the swamp, images of machines at work or timber stacked high on trailers. To fans, it looked like the same operation they remembered from television. But behind the scenes, the financial pressure was slowly increasing. When the numbers stopped working. By the late 2010s, the biggest risk facing the business wasn't the swamp. It was mathematics. Logging businesses traditionally operate on tight margins. Once expenses are deducted, profits can become surprisingly small. For swamp logging, the margins are even thinner. The terrain slows production. Equipment repairs happen more frequently. Transportation costs rise. At the same time, several economic pressures were growing stronger. Equipment was aging, and replacing specialized machines required large loans. Fuel prices were climbing. Diesel costs could suddenly spike, turning profitable jobs into break-even projects. And timber markets were unpredictable. Timber prices depend on housing construction, global trade, and economic trends far beyond the control of local logging companies. Imagine cutting timber for weeks, hauling it to mills, and discovering that the market price dropped before the load was delivered. That single change could erase the profit from an entire job. How many businesses can survive under that kind of uncertainty? 4 years, Bobby Goodson kept working through it. But the pressure never stopped building. The live stream that changed the conversation. That brings us back to the summer of 2022. When Bobby turned on his phone camera, many fans expected a simple update, maybe a story from the swamp or a memory from the show. Instead, they heard honesty. He talked about the challenges of the logging industry. About how difficult it had become for small operations to survive. About the economic pressures that viewers had never seen during the television years. For longtime fans, it was surprising. The man who always seemed calm and confident on television was now discussing the harsh financial realities behind the work. And suddenly, viewers began asking new questions. Was the golden era of independent logging disappearing? Could family-run operations survive in an industry increasingly dominated by large corporations? And perhaps the most important question of all. What happens to skilled workers when the industries they built their lives around begin to change? A legacy larger than television. Despite the hardships, one thing remained clear. Bobby Goodson's story was never just about a television show. It was about resilience. It was about a family business built through decades of hard work in some of the most difficult environments imaginable. And it was about the countless workers across rural America who keep industries running without ever appearing on television. Even today, many fans still remember the authenticity of swamp loggers. They remember the mud-covered machines, the tense moments when equipment sank, and the quiet leadership Bobby displayed while guiding his crew. But the deeper story goes beyond entertainment. It raises questions about how industries evolve, how small businesses survive, and how quickly public perception can differ from reality. Because sometimes the most compelling stories aren't the ones shown on television. They're the ones that continue long after the cameras stop rolling. And perhaps the real question is this. If the cameras return today, what new story would they tell about the swamps, the machines, and the people who still work there? Would it look the same as it did a decade ago? Or would it reveal an entirely new chapter in the life of a man who never stopped doing the work he loved? Even with decades of experience and careful management, there's a limit to what individual skill can overcome when markets shift. For Bobby Goodson, logging had never been simply a business calculation on paper. It was a way of life, one rooted in family history, long days in the woods, and a deep understanding of the land. Generations before television cameras ever arrived, the Goodson family had built their livelihood among the forests and wetlands of North Carolina. Hard work, persistence, and respect for nature were the foundations of that life. But the world around that tradition was changing. Markets evolved. Costs increased. Regulations expanded. And while Bobby had faced challenges before, the landscape of the logging industry was becoming more complicated with every passing year. And as if those challenges weren't enough, regulatory requirements also expanded. Working in wetland areas requires permits, environmental oversight, and strict compliance procedures. Wetlands are delicate ecosystems, and protecting them is important. Logging companies must ensure they do not damage waterways, disturb wildlife habitats unnecessarily, or alter natural water flows. Bobby had always followed those rules responsibly. Those who worked with him knew he respected the land. Logging, when done carefully, is a renewable industry. Trees grow back, forests regenerate, and responsible harvesting can maintain the balance between economic activity and environmental stewardship. But increased oversight meant more paperwork, more inspections, and more administrative tasks. And that created a problem. Logging isn't an office job. It's a field operation that depends on constant coordination. Machines moving, crews cutting, trucks hauling timber, and mills accepting deliveries on schedule. Every hour spent behind a desk filling out regulatory forms was an hour not spent managing equipment, crews, and production. More oversight also meant more costs. Environmental studies. Compliance documentation. Permit renewals. Legal consultations. Individually, these requirements were manageable. But as they accumulated year after year, they slowly added pressure to an industry already operating with narrow profit margins. None of these pressures alone would have destroyed the business. Bobby had survived recessions before. He had navigated fluctuating timber prices and difficult weather conditions. Storms could delay operations for weeks. Equipment failures could halt production. Markets could dip and recover. Logging required resilience. But together, these pressures formed something far more dangerous. They formed a perfect storm. And then came 2020, the year everything changed. When 2020 arrived, it brought a global pandemic that disrupted nearly every industry on Earth. From manufacturing to transportation to retail, entire systems slowed or stopped almost overnight. For independent logging operations, the effects were especially brutal. The first shock came from timber mills. Mills are the backbone of the logging economy. Loggers harvest the timber, but mills process it, cutting raw logs into lumber, paper products, plywood, and construction materials. Without mills, logging cannot exist. As industries shut down across the country, many mills reduced operations or stopped accepting deliveries altogether. Workers were sent home. Production schedules were cut back. Some mills closed temporarily while others operated with drastically reduced capacity. And here's the problem. If mills aren't buying timber, logging companies can't sell it. And if you can't sell timber, there's no revenue. No sales means no income. But the bills keep coming. Equipment loans still require payments. Modern logging machines, skidders, feller bunchers, loaders, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many companies rely on financing to acquire them. Insurance costs continue. Workers' compensation policies, equipment insurance, liability coverage, these expenses never pause. And experienced crews must be retained if a company hopes to restart operations later. Logging crews are highly skilled. A seasoned operator knows how to handle massive machines safely, maneuver through difficult terrain, and harvest timber efficiently. If those workers leave for other industries during a shutdown, replacing them later becomes extremely difficult. So companies face a difficult decision. Do you keep paying workers even when operations are slow? Or do you risk losing the team that built the business? What would you do if you were in that position? The second blow came from supply chains. Heavy logging equipment depends on specialized replacement parts. Hydraulics, cutting heads, transmission components, these machines endure enormous stress every day. When something breaks, repairs must happen quickly. During the pandemic, however, global supply chains slowed dramatically. Factories producing parts shut down or reduced production. Shipping delays grew longer. Ports struggled with backlogs. What used to take days to deliver suddenly took weeks, or longer. A machine sitting idle in the field doesn't generate income. And in logging, downtime can cascade quickly. If one key machine fails, the entire operation may grind to a halt. Timber can't be cut, loaded, or transported. For a business already operating on thin margins, that kind of delay becomes extremely dangerous. But the third hit was perhaps the hardest. Fuel prices. Logging is a diesel-driven industry. Skidders burn diesel. Loaders burn diesel. Logging trucks hauling heavy timber loads burn enormous quantities of diesel every single day. During and after the pandemic, diesel prices surged dramatically. And according to Bobby himself, there were times when the cost of diesel to haul timber exceeded the value of the load waiting at the mill. Think about that for a moment. Imagine cutting timber, loading it onto a truck, transporting it across miles of rural highways, only to realize the fuel required for the trip costs more than what the mill will pay for the wood. How can any business survive under those conditions? What do you do when the core math of your business stops making sense? Work harder. Cut more costs. Sometimes neither option works. You can't reduce fuel consumption beyond a certain point. Machines must run. Trucks must move. And if mills are paying less while operational costs keep rising, eventually the numbers stop balancing. When the numbers themselves break down, there may be no solution left. And by 2022, Bobby Goodson faced a decision he had hoped to avoid for years. The live stream that shocked fans. When Bobby started a Facebook live stream during the summer of 2022, viewers expected something familiar. Perhaps an update about work. Maybe a story from the woods. Or even reflections on the years since Swamp Loggers had aired. Instead, they heard something far more serious. Goodson's all-terrain logging was closing. The business his family had built over decades, long before television ever arrived, was shutting down. For many fans, the announcement came as a shock. To them, Bobby Goodson wasn't just a television personality. He represented an entire way of life. The show had introduced audiences to the demanding world of swamp logging, where crews worked through mud, standing water, dense forests, and unpredictable weather. But Bobby didn't hide the reasons behind the closure. He spoke plainly. Economic pressures had been building for years. COVID-19 disruptions. Mill closures. Rising fuel prices. Increasing costs of equipment and operations. There was no dramatic performance. No attempt to create a spectacle. Just an honest explanation from someone who had spent his life in the industry. But then Bobby did something unexpected. Instead of focusing only on his own situation, he spoke about the wider logging industry. He explained that many independent loggers across North Carolina and across the country were facing the same pressures. They simply didn't have a public platform to talk about it. Many were struggling quietly, trying to keep their operations alive while costs rose and markets shifted. So Bobby used the audience he had built over years to bring attention to the issue. He urged state leaders to recognize what was happening to small logging operations and the workers who depended on them. Because logging isn't just about timber. It supports truck drivers, equipment mechanics, fuel suppliers, mill workers, and countless rural communities. If independent logging companies disappear, entire economic chains can collapse with them. And that moment revealed something important. Because that's not the behavior of someone chasing publicity. It's the behavior of someone trying to stand up for an entire community. The community response. The reaction from fans was immediate. People who had watched Swamp Loggers years earlier flooded the comment sections with messages of support. Some shared memories of the show. Others thanked Bobby for giving them a glimpse into a world they had never seen before. Many understood the weight of what they were hearing. This wasn't a businessman casually stepping away from a project. It was a man acknowledging that a lifetime of work had reached its end. For some viewers, the moment raised difficult questions. What happens when traditional industries begin to disappear? How many small family-run operations are quietly closing across rural America? And what does that mean for the communities built around them? Perhaps the most powerful part of the live stream was its honesty. There was no attempt to soften the reality. No promises of a new television venture. No dramatic reinvention. Just the truth. Sometimes businesses, no matter how well run, no matter how respected, simply reach a point where continuing becomes impossible. And acknowledging that reality requires a kind of courage most people rarely talk about. What happens after the end? After the announcement, Bobby remained connected to the community that had supported him. He continued responding to fans online, expressing gratitude for their encouragement and kind messages. But there was no attempt to rebuild a media persona. No flashy new project. No effort to transform himself into a motivational figure or television celebrity. Instead, he remained exactly what he had always been. A straightforward man who built something real, worked hard for decades, and spoke honestly when the journey came to an end. And maybe that raises one final question worth thinking about. In a world where many people chase fame, what does it mean to simply stay true to your work and your character? Because that might be the real legacy of Bobby Goodson. He built a business from the ground up. He ran it through economic challenges, industry changes, and even the spotlight of national television. And when the time came to close that chapter, he told the truth about why. No spin. No exaggeration. Just honesty. And sometimes, that's the most powerful story of all. So what do you think about Bobby Goodson and the story behind Swamp Loggers? Do you believe independent industries like logging are slowly disappearing in today's economy? Or do you think there's still a future for small, family-run operations in a world dominated by large corporations? Your perspective matters. Share your thoughts and join the conversation.